Hello, and welcome to the Washington Kurdish Institute's Dr. Najmaldin Karim webinar series. In today's webinar topic, what would the closure of the HDP mean for Turkey and the Kurds? We are joined today by two distinguished, knowledgeable, and accomplished guests, Dr. Nicholas Danforth and Dr. Nazan Bedirhanoglu. Dr. Danforth, who received his PhD in history from Georgetown University after studying at Yale University, has written widely about Turkey, U.S. foreign policy, and the Middle East. Dr. Danforth is the author of the forthcoming book, The Remaking of Republican Turkey, Memory and Modernity Since the Fall of the Ottoman Empire. He has covered U.S.-Turkish relations for the Hellenic Foundation for European and Foreign Policy, the German Marshall Fund of the United States, the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, and the Bipartisan Policy Center. Dr. Bedirhanoglu received her PhD in sociology from Binghamton University after earning her master's in international relations from Ankara University. She is currently a Freedom Project postdoctoral fellow in political science at Wellesley College in Massachusetts. Her research includes political economy, foreign policy, the Middle East, and last but not least, the Kurdish question. We thank you both for joining us today. Before our guests' opening remarks, I would like to briefly detail and describe the background of the People's Democratic Party, the HDP, bringing us to our current discussion. The HDP, established in 2012, was founded with the goal of representing the interests and rights of approximately 20 million Kurds in Turkey, as well as other minorities. This was on the heels of 5 major Kurdish parties being officially banned in Turkey dating back to 1990. In the 2015 elections, led by Selahattin Demirtas and Figen Yüksekdağ, the HDP greatly exceeded expectations and gained over 13% of the vote, easily passing the 10% threshold in the Turkish government. In 2016, following the Turkish coup attempt, the Erdogan-led government initially focused their vengeance on the Gülenist movement, but turned their sights to the HDP soon thereafter. At Erdogan's order, Turkish judiciary began submitting HDP elected officials to anti-terrorism accusations. Following the Turkish parliament's decision to revoke immunity for several HDP politicians in May of 2016, that is, Demirtas, the party's co-leader, was imprisoned in November on bogus charges of spreading propaganda against the Turkish state, and namely for the Kurdistan Workers' Party. This was only the beginning of the calculated efforts to dismantle the HDP. Since then, thousands of its members have been jailed. Over 150 elected officials have been forcibly removed from office and replaced with government-appointed trustees. And after winning in 65 municipalities in the 2019 elections, the HDP now controls only 5 small towns. More recently, on March 17th of this year, a Turkish court's chief prosecutor, following threats from the AKP and their nationalist allies, the MHP, filed a suit to officially close down the HDP permanently. On March 31st, the Constitutional Court returned the case for closure, citing procedural deficiencies. It claims that once the deficiencies are rectified, it will re-examine the file. There is little doubt that the AKP and the MHP will continue aggressively to pursue closure of the HDP by all means necessary. And now we will ask our panelists to provide opening remarks, but before we do so, I just would like to advise our guests that they can submit through the Q&A feature in Zoom any questions that they may have for our panelists. And with that, thank you. And I will turn it over to Dr. Danforth to provide opening remarks to begin, and then over to Dr. Nazan after.
Thank you so much. I very much appreciate you having me on. Delighted to be part of the Dr. Karim lecture series. You at least summarized the grim situation. I will only further elaborate on that and try to give a little political context, explaining the recent developments, both in the context of Erdogan's campaign against the Kurdish movement in Turkey, going back to, let's say, fall 2014, as well as Erdogan's furious efforts to stay in power. Well, I'll say to stay in power at all costs until we see any evidence that this is not at all costs. Maybe it will turn out not to be, but so far the evidence seems to be this is indeed an effort to stay in power at all costs. For many of the reasons you mentioned, the closure case against the HDP is not at all a surprise, unfortunately. It comes on the heels, as you said, of the arrest of the HDP leadership, the arrest of a number of HDP MPs, a number of elected officials who were in office both before the last March 2019 municipal elections, and then a new round of arrests and purges of HDP officials who were elected in 2019, some of whom are in jail, some of whom have simply been stripped of their positions, and the towns, cities, regions that they controlled in southeastern Turkey are now under the control of AKP appointees. This move against the HDP also comes in the context of Erdogan's nationalist coalition partner, Devlet Bahçeli, repeatedly calling for it. There are different interpretations of the relationship between Erdogan and Bahçeli. Some people have argued that Bahçeli is actually pressuring Erdogan into taking this move, and that his calls have created the context in which Erdogan was forced to make this move. Other people, this seems more plausible to me, suggest that there's a more nuanced relationship, that Bahçeli's calls to do this, either function as trial balloons for Erdogan, or simply set the stage, lay the groundwork for Erdogan to then go ahead and make these moves. In either case, I think we can say with confidence, Erdogan would not be doing this if he didn't think it was ultimately going to help his political fortunes. The question, and maybe my colleague will have a better answer for this, that everyone has been asking is why now? Again, the fact this is happening is not surprising. Why at this moment? I can't offer a good answer. I can say a few things about how I think it relates to Erdogan's evolving political strategy. As the system is configured now, the way Erdogan would lose power is if 50.1% of the country could agree to vote for a different presidential candidate besides him. And I think when you saw the Istanbul mayoral election in 2019 being won by a CHP, non-AKP mayor, the way that happened is you had widespread support from HDP voters for the main opposition candidate. This represents, I think, the big threat to Erdogan going into the presidential election. And much of his policy, specifically the way he's handled the Kurdish issue, seems geared to making sure that the opposition cannot effectively unite against him. And so what he realizes is by taking this move against the HDP, he will put all of his opponents in the position where they will either have to condemn what he's doing, thereby potentially alienating nationalist voters within their own ranks. And there are many people who are deeply opposed to Erdogan, but are also deeply opposed to the HDP and the PKK. There are real fissures there for Erdogan to exploit. Or, alternatively, if the opposition parties support Erdogan in this or don't condemn the HDP closure forcefully enough, this will risk alienating HDP voters who will then be less likely to support, however much they dislike Erdogan, support Erdogan's opponent in a future presidential election. In this, so far we've seen the main opposition party condemn this move. Two of the small splinter opposition parties that come from within Erdogan's own movement condemn this move. The İYİ Party, Meral Akşener, who's the main nationalist, hyper-nationalist opposition figure, who in fact split with Erdogan's nationalist partner over their support or opposition to Erdogan, has been generally critical of Erdogan's moves, but a little more evasive. And again, I think Erdogan's hope is that the longer this case goes on, the more he makes this case a central issue in Turkish politics, the more these fractures in the opposition coalition will deepen, the more opposition politicians will be forced to comment on this issue, the more difficult it will be for them to hold their coalition together. So far, it's not clear that this approach has been a huge success, but Erdogan is good at this. These fractures are real. If he keeps pushing this, if he keeps holding this case in the news, he may succeed. And certainly from his point of view, this is better than talking about the economy, which is the other major issue which he's very eager to keep out of political discussions. I'd also add, precisely because Erdogan can control how this case plays out, how long it takes, the actual parameters in which the verdict is given, it fits, I think, with an approach. I'm not sure he knows exactly what his strategy is going to be going into the next election. He's eager to play politics, and he's eager to gain as many tools and as much flexibility to play politics as he can get, in the hopes, I think, of somehow figuring out a new strategy, a new coalition, a new set of rules for the next election that will enable him to win. And this is also all happening in the context of him calling for a new constitution, which, again, no one's quite clear what he has in mind, what the provisions of this constitution would be, but rewriting the constitution and the debate around this gives him more options at the end of the day, gives him new ways of playing the game, which, fairly or obviously unfairly, he can make work. The other thing I'd say before wrapping up, the way this closure, assuming the closure went ahead, assuming not just that the party was closed, but that it's, I think over 600 members are being slated for a permanent ban from politics. Were this to happen, given the structure of the Turkish electoral system, it would guarantee that the AKP would most likely pick up all of the HDPs, or the vast majority of the HDP's parliamentary seats from the southeast. One of the things that Erdogan's opponents have been proposing is a return to the parliamentary system. Turkey used to be a parliamentary system, now it's a presidential system. Erdogan is president. The return to the parliamentary system would be a kind of soft way to rein in Erdogan's power, creating a context in which Erdogan could give himself and his party a dramatic increase in parliamentary seats, either undermines this as a potential opposition strategy, I think, or ensures that even if there was a return to the parliamentary system, he could make sure that the AKP was in a position to dominate the parliament. And they continue to dominate effectively, dominate it even more effectively. As far as how this might play out, as you said, they returned the case because of technical issues with it. I think that's a tribute to actually how political this was, how badly written the case was. If you've read any Turkish legal cases, be they the marginally plausible ones related to the coup, the completely absurd one related to Osman Kavala, these are not well-constructed, well-written documents. The fact that this one was by all accounts so bad that the court, I think purely for appearance sake, wanted them to revise it to make it at least, maintain the veneer of legality, is really telling. But again, everyone assumes they will resubmit it, the case will go ahead. If for some reason Erdogan decides that it doesn't suit his agenda to actually, finish the case and close the party, he always has the option to do that. But I do think, as you suggested, these things take on a life of their own. And whatever reservations people in the AKP may have about party closures, however many doubts they might have about how ultimately effective this is, there are a few mechanisms left to stop this from moving forward. I think it was October of 2016. I spoke to a prominent AKP media personality who assured me that despite the indictment that had just been issued against Selahattin Demirtas, they would never actually arrest him because they knew what a politically counterproductive a move that would be. And a month later, he was in jail, and he remains in jail. Similarly, I think over the years, you've seen more moderate people in the AKP suggest that a winning strategy might be continue with the all-out war against the PKK and the political campaign, legal campaign against the HDP, but try to present the AKP as a champion of Kurdish rights. Make new moves, however moderate or token, on cultural rights as they continued this campaign, thereby trying to woo former, more conservative HDP voters. I think this is somewhere where Erdogan's coalition with the nationalists has made it difficult to go through with a strategy like this. And I'm also not sure at this point they think it would be terribly effective. You've also heard speculation about the idea that Erdogan may try to create a conservative, loyal, pro-AKP Kurdish party. Again, I think at this point the assumption is that people who couldn't vote for the HDP, weren't willing to vote for the CHP, would most likely join the parties that have split off, the AKP, founded by Babacan and Davutoglu, and that would be a more natural home for these voters than some kind of, artificial AKP proxy Kurdish party. So, again, we'll see where this goes, but there's very little reason to be optimistic. And, this will be the process, if nothing else, will be managed by Erdogan to ensure the maximum political benefit for him.
Thank you very much, Dr. Danforth. Dr. Nazan, if you can please provide us some opening remarks as well. Thank you.
I'd love to. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So I agree with most of the points that Dr. Danforth put forth, but I, again, would like to start with a summary of what's going on, and then I would like to share my 2 cents on why this is going on right now and what we might expect to happen. So for the definition of the situation, as you both put forward, the public prosecutor of the Supreme Court of Appeals filed this indictment at the Constitutional Court for the closure of the party, which is the largest third parliamentary group right now. So even with those MPs who are stripped of their privileges, they still have more members of the parliament, more than the Nationalist Party, who is the ally of HDP. The indictment is, again, I would like to repeat Dr. Danforth's point here, is returned on technical details, and it is indeed torturous to read these indictments just like any other court documents produced in Turkish courts. But there are, at the center of the indictment is, again, ties with terrorism and propagandizing for terrorism. And everything that is cited in the indictment is based on the previous court cases and the talks and press releases, public talks and press releases made by the members of the party. So even under Turkey's legal codes and rules, there is nothing to criminalize here. However, we do know that this is political, just like all other legal actions against the members of the Kurdish party. So, thinking or talking in the realm of law or the legal field is meaningless. But the indictment, what the indictment asks is serious in terms of asking for 5 years of political ban for 687 members of the party, some of whom are deceased, and this is one of the reasons why the indictment is returned to the prosecutor right now. But as I said, we know that this is political. We intuitively might know it, of course, but not just that. Right at the moment when the prosecutor sent the indictment to the Constitutional Court, the people close to Erdogan made declarations. Right, even his director of communications said that it's obvious that HDP has ties with terrorist organizations, it should be closed down, but the court is going to make the decision. So this is, of course, part of a larger crackdown on Kurdish politics. HDP releases reports on human rights violations against the members of the party, even they do not know the exact number of people who are detained and imprisoned right now, right? It's even hard to keep this record for the party. So because what's going on is very large scale and extremely arbitrary. Since 2015, over 17,000 people who are members of the party, affiliated with the party, were detained. And around 4,000 people are in prisons right now. And we know that since the municipal elections, now there are 48 municipalities who are governed by appointees, the trustees by the government. And this was also a policy in the elections before. So, you know, the biggest source of legitimacy for, of course, any group in power, but especially for JDP and Erdogan was that, you know, they're being elected, but they never had that same respect for others who are elected. And there's the other part where some members of the parliament are stripped of their immunity. Most recently, Mr. Gergerlioğlu is just put in jail. And the European Court of Human Rights, you know, made the decision for the release of Demirtaş, and there's still no action on that, and of course we don't expect that to happen either. So why the government is doing this right now? The short and obvious answer is to prolong their time in power. Maybe they're even like getting ready for the next election, and I honestly don't think that they have a big major plan that they are, you know, playing out one by one. They're testing the grounds, and this has been their strategy for over a decade right now. You know, creating spectacles is one of the major strategies of the government, and through those spectacles, dominating the public agenda, right, controlling the topics to be discussed in the public space, and also, you know, coming up with these mega projects and whatnot. But something foundational is also going on. The economy is in trouble, right? In addition to that, Turkey is in a big democratic backsliding. It's been going on for so many consecutive years right now that the country's score is going down and down. It's actually one of the worst right now. But the economy was operating on cheap labor. Most of it is cheap Kurdish labor, right? And it's so troubling right now that it became hard to control with the devaluation of the currency, especially against the US dollar, and the uncontrollable interest rate, the rates of high unemployment, and the real inflation rates, right? The figures declared do not reflect the real numbers. So taking all of these together, the share of votes of Erdogan himself and JDP by itself is in decline. This is why they had to rely on these alliances with the Nationalist Party. And this might give us some ideas about their legitimacy, but also how they govern the institutions, right? And I think one of the main reasons of trying to ban HDP right now, which is something they do not even need, because already the party is mostly incapacitated, right? Their members are in jail, the leaders are in jail. It's hard to take any political action on ground in Turkey, anywhere in Turkey right now, because there is no official even like right to assembly. You cannot hold demonstrations. So it's hard to even organize on the ground, which the Kurdish people and the Kurdish movement has a lot of original ways to overcome these restrictions, because they are experts in it right now. But still, the oppression on not just the Kurdish opposition, but all fields of opposition right now is really harsh. And then everyone has to deal with their own problems because everybody is in jail and whatnot. So this is hard. But I think they are not just trying to contain or limit the Kurdish politics itself, but also by making this another spectacle, trying to motivate their own election base on the basis of, you know, inciting nationalist sentiments. So this will be another way to hold their electoral base together, or not to lose some part of it. That's one of the main reasons. I think it's part of the, you know, controlled oppressive policies that we are dealing with right now. And so I would like to conclude by what might happen in the long run and in the short run. So in the long run, of course, you know, all of these are in the way. There hasn't been a case in history, in politics, anywhere in the world that, you know, you can just win by sheer oppression. It's impossible. This has been going on for, you know, over a century right now. But if you look more closely, since the 60s, 70s, you know, this struggle between the Kurdish movement and the Turkish state, it's not resolvable on this ground. And we know that even if you put everyone in jail, even if you ban all the parties to emerge, you cannot really erase this issue completely. You know, so a complete annihilation or complete assimilation is impossible from this point on. So in the long run, we have all the reasons to be optimistic. But in the short run, I think we should be concerned, and I am concerned. For one thing, no one can really expect the immediate consequences of what might happen if HDP is banned right now. Even I don't think the judiciary body or Erdogan himself or you know, the government can guess the immediate consequences. The sentiment with people, the sentiment of people on the ground is more like, this had happened before. You know, this is the you know, in the 1990s, it was just an ordinary thing for the Kurdish parties to be banned, and every time it was banned, a new party re-emerged. Yes, this was the case before in the 1990s. This could happen again, of course. The Kurds always have backup organizations because they know what is to come. But I think the repertoire of the government is also changing. Right, the conditions are not really similar to 1990s in a lot of aspects, given also the tremendous, you know, socioeconomic changes throughout the Kurdish society, not just in Turkey in general. So the analogy with the 1990s is meaningful in a lot of senses to give hope to people, but also the setting is a bit different. So the Kurdish organizations, the Kurdish political movement might come with, and I expect them to come out with another original way to deal with this, as they did back in 2000s to overcome the 10% threshold to nominate independent representatives for the parliament. And then once there was the power, you know, even in the last elections, like HDP received 11.7 of the votes. So they have that electoral base right now to overcome the 10% threshold. But these creative ways to come up with to navigate the electoral system in Turkey cannot be applied in the same way right now, because the parliament, we know, is not the same anymore. You know, since the 2017 referendum, I think it's all different right now. So in the short run, I am concerned, but I also would like to be hopeful with the anticipation of what is to come in the long run. So maybe I should just wrap up my comments here and then leave some room for Q&A and discussion.
Thank you very much, and thank you both. I think we hit on many similar sentiments there. you really nailed it there with the short term and long term. I think that's where a lot of us feel this is going to land. Obviously, this is not something that can be extinguished, like you said. This does not go away through oppression. History has proven that. I'd like to ask a question that, I've been kind of deciding what order to go with questions, but given how we wrapped up there, when we look back at the history of the HDP specifically, and their overwhelmingly successful outcome several years ago, and then all of the difficulties since, I'd like to ask both of you this question, and Dr. Nizam, if you're okay, we'll start with you. As far as any missteps or miscalculations the HDP may have made along the way, anything you'd like to point to? In some ways, the position they've been put in is lose-lose in many ways. So as far as balancing that relationship with the regime, with the government, with the other parties, and then continuing to represent their constituents, their base. Any thoughts on things that in hindsight could have been done differently or better by the HDP themselves?
Well, of course, there's always room for improvement. So thinking back on quote-unquote mistakes to be made, mistakes are important in the sense that they could be amended for future, right? They could open up new fields of thinking for future. But I think for a long time now, HDP has been in a hard place, especially since 2015. One thing that we might think of is that the road to 2015, when HDP almost single-handedly, I'm thinking about the June 2015 elections, pushed Erdogan to lose majority in the parliament. This was the biggest victory in terms of HDP's electoral history. So from that point on, I think what followed in the summer and fall of 2015 and the rise of urban warfare, from that point on, maybe electoral politics was becoming more and more impossible for HDP, and also organization on the ground became extremely hard, as I said earlier. So maybe instead of trying to be reactive to what is to become from the government, instead of trying to build more on the ground, would have been the obvious route to take. But as I said, I think it's that lose and lose position was imposed on them rather than they creating that. So this is, I think the developments following the 2015 elections should be rethought, but also I'm not really sure what could have been done different during that time. It's not just on the shoulders of HDP. I think opposition in Turkey in general, most specifically the Republican Party, is to be blamed here. It's almost like they are, happy to retain their position instead of, enlarging the opposition, the alliances in the opposition, or to claim power. So it's not on it shouldn't just be on the shoulders of HDP, is my verdict here.
Agreed. Thank you. That's certainly there's no one answer to that question, I'm sure, and it's a hard one. I just thought it was the right time to ask it. Dr. Danforth, if you have anything to add on that.
No, I think Dr. Badrhanoğlu said it very well. I mean, this isn't, at the end of the day, it's not on the shoulders of the HDP. You can obviously find small things they could have done differently. If anyone wants to seriously argue that they should have, empowered Erdogan, helped him become executive president in the hopes that he then would have been magnanimous and pushed through a peace process that would have given, then all of a sudden Erdogan would have wanted to share power and give autonomy to the Southeast, and that really would have worked. If that's really what you're saying, seriously make that case. I'm deeply skeptical. Again, there'll always be people who criticize the HDP for not condemning the PKK more harshly. But again, they're in a similar situation to parties like the CHP, the main opposition party. They, on one hand, they're trying to make an alliance with people who are on the opposite side of a very deep divide. In the HDP, they do have a very nationalist constituency, and they're also now trying to appeal to CHP voters who are very, in some cases, almost all anti-PKK, in some cases very anti, any kind of Kurdish rights. This is not, I think Demirtas did that as well as was humanly possible for any politician, and ever minor mistakes he could have made were not the fundamental issue here.
Thank you both. And thank you for those that are submitting questions through the Q&A feature. Please continue to do so. So I'm going to try to get to another topic, and it's kind of multi-pronged, but in the same family, and that is the international community and neighbors and other entities, and what role are they playing today? How can they be more? Well, is it enough, let's say, and what else can be done? Namely, we'll focus, just because in recent news we've seen EU representatives meeting with Erdogan, and the news that's come out of that. We've seen a new administration here in the United States, and of course a different approach to foreign policy. And then also, last but not least, the Kurdish entities, so the KRG specifically, and is there a role that they can play, as difficult as that may be as well? So Dr. Danforth, if you don't mind, I'll start with you there. I know that was a lot, but it's really, I think it's important, and it also will capture some of the questions we're seeing in the Q&A portal.
I certainly think this is something that both the United States and the EU should be more outspoken about. The Biden administration, as you say, has at least rhetorically been in the right place. They've made firm statements about human rights and democracy issues in Turkey. They've condemned the closure case against the HDP. Biden himself personally issued a statement about Turkey's withdrawing from the Istanbul Convention on the rights of women. After particularly the just gleeful disregard for human rights under the Trump administration, and even the Biden administration's, even the Obama administration's occasional tendency to keep quiet about these issues to maintain whatever they were maintaining in Syria. Again, this rhetorical step is good. That said, so long as the United States keeps it at this level of firm rhetorical condemnation, this is an existential issue for Erdogan. Staying in power is an existential issue for him. I fear, even if Biden is very forceful, that at the end of the day, Erdogan will do what he has to do to stay in power. At some fundamental level, the EU, I think, may have more leverage just because of the depth of the economic ties. They unfortunately have not even been in the right place rhetorically. The most recent, the visit, the statements they've made, references to positive momentum in the Turkish-EU relationship, even raising the possibility of a revised customs union immediately after the closure case against the HDP was open. I think unfortunately this signals very clearly to Erdogan that the EU is concerned. It's concerned about the refugee issue. It's concerned about keeping things quiet in the Eastern Mediterranean. And that even more than the United States, they've made clear that as long as Erdogan continues to cooperate on these particular fronts, even if I don't think there's any, Turkey's not going to join the EU under Erdogan. I don't think there's any real possibility of a revised customs union, but I think the EU sees this kind of rhetorical optimism as kind of a freebie. They don't, they're kind of willing to maintain the illusion that things are going okay. That's something Erdogan very much wants. And the very fact they're willing to maintain the illusion while Turkey is pushing ahead with something as undemocratic as this, I think unfortunately confirms a message that Erdogan probably internalized long ago, which is that some pretty modest accommodation on foreign policy issues gives him a free hand to be as repressive as he wants to at home. And given the history of the United States and the European Union on these issues, both recently and historically, it's going to take a real concerted effort. It's going to take, not just more principled rhetoric, but a real commitment to actually behaving in a more principled way before anything the US or the EU does can start changing Erdogan's political calculations.
Thank you. Dr. Bedirnoglu, do you have anything to add to that, please?
And I also think that both EU and US administration should be, more active, but I highly doubt that. Again, the latest visit by European Commission President and European Council President to Turkey was meaningful in this sense, because they said that the European Court of Human Rights decisions should be implemented, and issues of human rights should not be a matter of bargain. However, it's really obvious that the deal, even if this wasn't spoken out loud, the deal was mostly about keeping refugees and immigrants away from European Union. So I think that they are continuing this conciliatory approach, or appeasement, if you will, against Erdogan, and he really should lose some of this support from abroad to be able to for the opposition to have some room at least. This is not enough. It's just lip service to democracy on the behalf of European Union. Again, for the United States, on paper it looks good, thinking of all the expectations from the new administration. However, it also looks like Biden administration is going to avert some of these issues to the European Union, because they also made these declarations that EU shouldn't be harsh on sanctions based on Eastern Mediterranean. So long story short, I think this appeasement policy is not benefiting any democratic forces in Turkey, right? The people groups and civil society who are fighting for democracy in Turkey is not receiving enough support from abroad. That's for sure. For KRG, KRG should be concerned about Erdogan's actions over the border, and all of these military excursions are setting precedents for more. So on that note, I think recently there have been more communications between Erbil and Ankara. So I think in the long run, KRG should be really concerned about these actions, because I think it's signaling more military actions abroad, and of course KRG is dealing with their own democratic deficit and other problems over there. But in terms of foreign relations, I'm a bit pessimistic on that ground. I'm concerned, I must say.
Thank you very much. And I will get back to that in a moment, but I do want to get back to the submitted questions here. And this one is addressed to both panelists. So the question is, it seems as though the HDP is isolated within the opposition bloc, even if its closure would likely be detrimental to all opposition parties. How is the CHP navigating between its Kemalist nationalist roots and the boon of the HDP that the HDP offers in terms of putting a check on AKP power, at least in the parliament? Dr. Nazan, if you'd like to start with that.
The reason why the Kurdish party, HDP, Pro-Kurdish party, HDP is isolated, I agree with that, has something to do with structural racism in Turkey too. And I think, first of all, the opposition knows that they need Kurdish votes, right? Without Kurdish votes in Turkey, it's impossible for the opposition parties and groups to overcome the reign of Erdogan. So, but also, if and when every time HDP is dealing with these harsh, oppressive policies, it also slightly benefits the Republican Party as well. Think of the Istanbul elections recently, or the municipal elections in general. I think the Republican Party relies on the fact that Kurdish votes, with all the hostility coming towards the government to them, has to go to CHP at some point, at least in municipal elections, right? They do not have any existence in the Kurdish towns, other opposition parties. It's so CHP cannot really do anything over there, especially in any kind of municipal elections. However, in the West, they think that they are, even after all of this, are going to have the Kurdish votes. But also, even recently, HDP leaders made more declarations about thinking of a third way. The things shouldn't be between nationalism and over-nationalism or political Islam in Turkey. So the HDP project itself was also something like that, right? The project itself was alongside the quote-unquote Kurdish parties, was something to expand into Turkish opposition. So it's impossible for the opposition. So they should really think and find ways to cooperate and collaborate more. Otherwise, it's not just, especially in the long run, it's not just the banning of HDP, but this would also impact the other opposition parties, most specifically the Republican Party's votes as well.
Thank you. Dr. Danforth, if you'd like to add, please.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo all that and only add that it does very much seem like the CHP leadership is aware of the importance of maintaining support from the HDP. Official statements from the party have been, very supportive. Members of the party called the closure case a coup against democracy in Turkey. Mayor İmamoğlu has been very outspoken about this, but I think at the end of the day, they're also aware that they, call it structural racism, call it hyper-nationalism, they have a constituency that's made very uncomfortable by the principled stand they're taking. And they're trying to square a very difficult circle. And in terms of, I have no way of gauging, when they do take the right stand on something like this, how many votes that's costing them on the other flank, and not having any good way to gauge this. We can only hope that at the end of the day, I don't know, either people's reasonableness or hostility to Erdogan is enough to overcome these very real divides.
Thank you. Back to something that was mentioned, back to Dr. Nazan's comments regarding how the KRG can, one is how they are being affected, and then what they can do to help. It's just kind of more on a broad level of Erdogan's expansionist ambitions, and how that has affected many other countries, region in general. And if there's an opportunity for some of those countries to support the Kurds and in Turkey in general, and because obviously their interests are somewhat aligned in an unusual way, that there is this aggressive body that is ultimately detrimental to both the Kurds within the country, others within the country, and then of course to the region in general. And is there any thoughts on there being some form of a kind of a quasi-coalition outside of the ones that we mentioned earlier to directly or indirectly support the Kurds in Turkey?
You mean an international coalition?
Well, I'm outside of the questions. Really, are specifically the countries of Egypt, Greece, these countries, others that have seen encroachment into their lands or threats to their lands by the Erdogan regime.
Well, I think Greece's concerns about Eastern Mediterranean and the relationship between Turkey and Greece has always been tumultuous in that sense, right? Erdogan's first years in power seemed to ameliorate, or the now forgotten zero problems with the neighbors' policies. But except for that brief exception, it's a bit hard for both members of NATO to act against Turkey harshly, right? The contentions between Turkey and Greece are mostly on the basis of foreign policy or Aegean Sea and Mediterranean. So Greece had never directly got involved in Kurdish politics in Turkey, right? Or in other parts of Kurdistan as well. So it's a bit too much to expect, I would say, and then they would also be aligned with European Union policies. But Egypt is another case. In terms of the general, political equilibriums in the Middle East, I think Erdogan is also losing popularity on the ground, right? So, but again, it's extremely dangerous, or countries are extremely cautious in terms of talking about quote unquote minorities in other countries, in especially in the Middle East, right? This is too much to expect. But as I said, the expansionist policy of Erdogan is now being tolerated mostly, and I don't think this is a trend that other countries should just look away. It's important in the sense that this creates a lot of precedent for the region. So that's what I am worried about, and other countries should be worried about too.
Thank you.
But the only thing I can think of to add, I think belatedly American policymakers realized that domestic Kurdish issue, the Kurdish issue in Turkey and the domestic tensions that raised, as much as they wanted to ignore it, had a very destabilizing impact on Syria and on US policy in Syria. To the extent people from the KRG could convey to US policymakers that the continuation of the Turkish PKK conflict and the Turkish government's issue with the Kurdish movement more broadly is and continues to be a deeply destabilizing factor in the KRG. And if at some level that message helped get US policymakers more concerned about helping resolve this issue within Turkey to the extent they can play a positive role there, I think that would be good.
Thank you. So we're running up on the hour, but I did want to ask a question, and if we can answer this one, I think we've solved decades, if not a century, worth of panels and discussions and meetings and a lot of angst and disappointment. So it's a very frustrating question. We've seen, and not specifically in Kurdistan, or excuse me, in Turkey, but just more generally with the Kurds, that it has taken near genocidal or massacres of some sort to even get the attention of the international community on a recognized scale, over the past several decades. We saw when the Syrian Kurds fought alongside the United States, and they struggled to even reserve a seat at the Geneva peace talks due to Turkey's vetoes. What's it going to take, aside from mass casualties, as really we've only seen the only thing that moved the needle, to really get recognition of the Kurdish question? There have been different kind of approaches saying that the answers to the Kurdish question lie in Kandil. There have been different types of approaches, but really nothing has moved that needle. So if in closing you can each provide a little bit of your perspective on that. And thank you.
Shall I start?
So you have a more optimistic answer than I do, please.
I would like to keep hope at this point. So you are right in saying that this it takes like near genocidal danger or being close to extinction just to be noticed by the international community. I think this has something to do with, first, of course, the way that international system is operating on, right? The contemporary system that we have, which has been going on since a couple centuries by now, is that the nation state system doesn't really allow these kinds of like anti-systemic movements or anti-systemic groups to be visible in this. And I would like to cite Ismail Beşikçi here. Kurds not just being an internal colony, also given all the international developments since the fall of Ottoman Empire, is also an international colony in this sense. I think especially most Kurds in diaspora were pleased with the attention that Kurds received, especially during the fight against ISIS. But I was also a bit sad to see that it requires people to fight to that level just to be seen in the West. So that's a bit hard, right? But there are two things simultaneously going on there. First of all, all of the ideals that the Kurdish society is trying to further develop, the contemplation of a new society, the contemplation on a new economic system. But all of them are somehow crashed, or has to face the realities of the international system, of the quote-unquote geopolitical moves in the region and whatnot. So it's hard to reconcile in between these two. This is, I think, most evident in the case of Rojava. Right, all of those gains on the ground are being erased by like hard international politics. So trying to think pragmatically without losing the ideals should be the best thing to do. But again, as I said, international support is really crucial to supplementing all of these fights for democracy on the ground. So somehow it should be made aware in the international community that this has been going on for a long time right now, and people's lives are at stake with all of these like aggressive military excursions around. But as you rightly put it, this is a centuries-long question, and I would like to echo back my very first point in my opening remarks, that in the long run, there is no other solution. There is nothing, I can't think of anything viable other than a democratic solution to centuries-long struggles of Kurdish politics.
Thank you very much. Dr. Danforth.
I guess to start with, the discouraging thing, I think, for me was to see that even at a moment when I think the Kurdish cause had as much support and attention and interest in the United States as it ever has, be it then with the KRG independence referendum or Trump's withdrawal from Syria, you actually saw how little that support meant. I think in many cases very genuine, very emotional support for the cause, for the Kurdish people, how little that actually meant in terms of policy. So from the international perspective, again, as Dr. Bedirhanoğlu said, given how the international system works now, given the interests of a lot of states in the region, I don't think the international community isn't necessarily going to solve this. But then, yes, as grim as it looks right now, as disturbing as the degree of hypernationalism on display in Turkey right now is, eventually I do think this will be solved by democratization in Turkey. And there are, you can find glimmers of hope if you really want to. The fact that the recent talk by Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, the head of the opposition, supporting primary education in Kurdish, which historically is a big step for the CHP. The fact that when Erdogan was supporting the peace process with the PKK and told his followers they should support it, they all supported it. That was real. And the fact, now, because it's very much in Erdogan's interest not to support that, he's done his best and done a disturbingly effective job drumming up, anti-PKK, anti-HDP, anti-Kurdish sentiment. The fact that at least the conversation about, identity, about, the recognition that you would have that ideally in the Turkish Republic, you would have some role for Kurdish identity, that I think there have been real changes there that a future government, were it so inclined, were it more democratic, could take advantage of.
Thank you. And I think we'll go back to Dr. Nazan's point about this. This is there is a long-term view here, and this is a flame that won't be extinguished. And so we have run out of time. I want to sincerely thank you both for participating, informative, thoughtful points of view from both. I hope very much that you'll join us again in a future discussion, hopefully on a brighter topic in a better place for the Kurds of Turkey, for the region in general. And with that, thank you. And thank you to all of those who joined us today. And we look forward to seeing you all in a future Dr. Najmaldin Karim webinar series panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much for holding this timely event.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you.